My name is Arthur, and there are evenings now when I sit in the living room with the television turned off, listening to the quiet that used to belong to two people. I never imagined silence could feel so heavy, not when I was young. Back then, I thought love was something that happened once and then stayed. I thought marrying the right person was the hard part. I thought after that, life would simply take care of the rest. I was wrong, not because I didn't love my wife. I loved her very much. That's what makes this harder to admit. Because love by itself turned out not to be enough. I'm an old man now, old enough to understand that relationships rarely disappear overnight. They fade, quietly, respectfully even, and sometimes the people inside them don't notice until they're standing in the ruins, wondering when everything changed. I tell this story because I spent too many years believing good intentions counted for more than they do. They don't. I met Helen when I was 24. She was working at the public library, and I only went there because my friend had forgotten his wallet and needed me to drive him. Funny how ordinary moments change entire lives. She had dark hair back then, kind eyes, a laugh that made strangers feel welcome. She noticed people. That was her gift. She noticed old women struggling with bags, children sitting alone, nervous young men pretending they weren't nervous, including me. I asked her to dinner 2 weeks later. Nothing expensive, a small diner with cracked booths and bad coffee. We stayed until closing, not because the food was good, because conversation came easily. I remember thinking I had never felt so relaxed around another person. We married 3 years later, and honestly, the early years were beautiful. Not perfect, just simple. We rented a small house. We argued over paint colors and grocery lists. We laughed at stupid things. We stayed up late talking about children we didn't have yet. Those memories still make me smile. People assume regret erases the good years. It doesn't. Sometimes that's what makes the loss hurt more, because there really was something precious there, and I thought precious things lasted on their own. When our first child was born, life changed. Not dramatically, gradually. Less sleep, more responsibilities, more bills, more reasons to be tired. But we were happy, or at least I thought we were. Looking back, I think Helen was working harder at our marriage than I realized. Not because she loved me more, because she understood something I didn't. She understood that love required attention. I thought love required loyalty. Those are not the same thing. I worked long hours. Not because I was chasing money, not really. I was chasing security. My father had struggled financially. I remembered the fear in our house when bills piled up. I swore my family would never feel that fear. So I worked and worked and worked. Helen understood. At least, that's what I told myself. Whenever she suggested a weekend away, I'd say, after this project. Whenever she wanted dinner together, I'd say, tomorrow. Whenever she asked if we could spend more time together, I'd promise things would calm down soon. Soon became my favorite lie. Years passed. The children grew. Life became routines, and routines are dangerous because they can disguise neglect as normal life. Every morning, she'd hand me coffee. Every evening, she'd ask about my day. Every birthday, every anniversary, every Christmas, she made sure our family felt warm and connected, and I assumed that warmth would always be there. I didn't realize someone was creating it, someone was tending it, someone was protecting it, and that someone wasn't me. I wasn't cruel, I wasn't unfaithful, I didn't yell, which made it easier to believe I was a good husband. Maybe I was, but being harmless isn't the same as being present. That's something I understand now, not then. Back then, I thought stability mattered more than attention. I thought she knew I loved her, and she did. But people need more than knowledge. They need experiences, conversations, affection, shared moments, small things. I underestimated small things my entire life. There were signs. I see them now. Her eating dinner before I came home because waiting had become exhausting. Her reading books alone while I watched television. Her going to family gatherings without asking if I wanted to come. At the time, I told myself she was independent. I thought that was healthy. I never stopped to ask why she had stopped needing me. That's the frightening part. People don't always leave when they stop feeling close. Sometimes they stay. Sometimes they continue smiling. Sometimes they continue taking care of everyone. And little by little, they begin living emotionally somewhere else. There was one evening I remember clearly. The children had moved out. The house was quiet. Helen had cooked dinner, candles on the table, nothing fancy, just effort. And I ruined it without even realizing. Work had been difficult. I barely noticed the candles, barely tasted the meal, spent most of dinner complaining about problems that no longer matter and people whose names I can't even remember now. At one point, she stopped talking. I didn't notice immediately. I just kept speaking. Finally, she looked at me and smiled. Not sadly, not angrily, just tired. And she said, "Arthur, do you ever notice when I'm trying?" I laughed, actually laughed. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. I can still see her face, not wounded, not dramatic, just disappointed, which somehow feels worse, because disappointment arrives after hope becomes tired. I apologized that night, but apologies are strange things. They matter, but they cannot replace years. I promised I'd do better, and I meant it. I truly meant it, but meaning something and changing something are two very different things. That's another lesson life taught me too late. Months passed, then years, and I kept believing there would be another anniversary, another vacation, another conversation, another chance to become the husband I imagined myself to be. People like me live inside intentions. We love tomorrow. Tomorrow's comfortable. Tomorrow demands nothing. But love happens today, and I didn't understand that. Helen still smiled, still called me sweetheart, still took care of things, which fooled me, because I mistook kindness for happiness and loyalty for closeness. One winter evening, we sat quietly in the living room, neither of us speaking, the kind of silence married people understand, except this silence felt different, older somehow. She looked at me and asked a question I wasn't prepared for. "Arthur, if we met today, do you think we'd still fall in love?" I remember smiling. thinking it was a romantic question. I answered immediately, "Of course," but she didn't smile back. She simply nodded, and something inside me became uneasy. Not frightened, not yet, just uneasy. Because for the first time in our marriage, I realized I didn't actually know what she would have answered, and that thought stayed with me long after she had gone upstairs, long after the dishes were done, long after the lights were turned off. I lay awake that night beside the woman I loved, and for the first time in decades, I wondered if love could slowly starve, not because two people stopped caring, but because one of them stopped noticing. And I wish I could tell you that was the moment I changed. I wish I could tell you fear made me wiser. But life doesn't work that way. Not for people like me. People like me believe there will always be one more chance, one more season, one more year. And for most of my life, I believed love would patiently wait for me to catch up. I didn't know then that even beautiful things need to be fed. I didn't know that marriages can grow lonely while two people still share the same bed. And I certainly didn't know that the saddest kind of loss isn't always sudden. Sometimes it happens slowly enough that you mistake it for ordinary life. And by the time you finally recognize it, someone else's heart has already grown tired. Years passed after that conversation. Not dramatic years, ordinary years, which I've learned are the ones that shape a life. We still celebrated anniversaries, still exchanged gifts, still attended weddings and birthdays. From the outside, I think people would have said we had a good marriage. Maybe we did, but appearances can be generous. The truth is, there are couples who stop hurting each other long before they stop loving each other. And there are couples who stop loving each other long before they stop living together. I don't know exactly when Helen began feeling lonely. Maybe loneliness doesn't arrive in a single moment. Maybe it accumulates like dust, like winter, quietly. There were things she stopped doing, small things. She stopped reaching for my hand during movies, stopped asking my opinion about books she was reading, stopped waking me up to watch thunderstorms, something she'd always loved. I noticed those things, but I explained them away. People change, I told myself. Marriage settles. This is normal. I had an answer for everything. What I lacked were questions. I never asked if she was happy. Not honestly. Not in a way that required me to hear the answer. Because deep down, I think I was afraid. Afraid that the answer would demand something from me. Something uncomfortable. Presence, attention, change. And I had become very good at avoiding change. Then she got sick. Nothing catastrophic at first. Just exhaustion. Doctor appointments, blood tests, medication. I attended some appointments, missed others, always with good reasons. Good reasons have destroyed many things, not bad reasons. Good ones. That's what people misunderstand. You don't lose a marriage because you're evil. Sometimes you lose it because life keeps handing you reasonable excuses. And eventually, reasonable excuses become a life. The illness changed her. Not physically at first. Emotionally, she became quieter, not angry, not bitter, just distant. Like someone slowly moving toward a door you couldn't yet see. One afternoon, after another appointment, We sat in the car, rain on the windshield, neither of us speaking. Then she said something that still visits me at night. She said, "Arthur, I've spent so many years loving you that I forgot what it feels like to be loved back." I wish I could describe what that sentence did to me, but words aren't enough. Because she wasn't accusing me. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She sounded tired, and tiredness is more frightening than anger. Anger still fights. Tiredness lets go. I promised her things would change, and this time they did. At least I tried. I brought flowers, planned dinners, suggested trips, started paying attention. And for a while I thought we were finding each other again. But there's something painful I've learned. Attention given out of fear feels different from attention given out of love. People know. Helen knew. One evening she looked at me with tears in her eyes. Not many, just enough. And she said softly, "I didn't want flowers, Arthur. I wanted all those ordinary Tuesdays." I didn't understand immediately. Now I do. She wasn't grieving grand gestures. She was grieving everyday life. Breakfast conversations, walks after dinner, little moments. Those tiny things I considered insignificant. Those tiny things that actually were the marriage. Not the anniversaries, not the vacations, not the expensive gifts. Just ordinary Tuesdays and ordinary Wednesdays. Ordinary mornings, ordinary evenings. That's where love lives. Not in emergencies and not in promises, in ordinary days. She recovered physically, mostly. But something else had grown tired, something invisible. And invisible things are dangerous because you notice them too late. A few years later, she sat me down at the kitchen table. Same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, helped children with homework, shared coffee, built an entire life. She looked calm. That frightened me immediately. People think breakups arrive with shouting. Not always. Sometimes they arrive with peace. She said she wasn't angry, hadn't been angry in years. She simply felt alone, and had felt alone for a very long time. She told me she loved me, but she no longer knew how to reach me. And eventually, she stopped trying. I cried, really cried. For the first time in decades, I begged, promised, apologized, but desperation is a poor substitute for consistency. And consistency was what she had needed all along. Not panic, not fear, not promises. Presence. She moved out. 6 months later, there was no betrayal, no hatred, no enemies. Just sadness. And 2 old people carrying different regrets. After she left, the house became unbearably quiet, not peaceful, empty. I'd discovered things I'd never noticed before. The sound of the refrigerator, the creaking floor, the clock in the hallway, the silence at breakfast. God, the silence at breakfast. I missed her laugh, missed her books on the coffee table, missed her humming while cooking, missed things I had spent years overlooking. That's the cruelty of regret. It teaches you the value of something after you're no longer trusted with it. People ask me if I still love her. That's such a strange question. Of course I do. Love didn't disappear. Neglect simply outlived it. That's different. Sometimes she calls, sometimes I call. Birthdays, Christmas. Small conversations, kind conversations. But not marriage. That chapter ended quietly. and I accept that now. Acceptance isn't happiness, it's simply honesty. If you're listening to this, I don't want you to hear blame. I don't blame myself every hour anymore. Life is too short for endless punishment. But I do wish I had understood sooner that love isn't self-sustaining. People are. Buildings aren't. Gardens aren't. And marriages aren't. Everything beautiful needs tending. Everything beautiful needs attention. Not because it's weak, because it's alive. I spent too many years assuming love would survive automatically. I treated it like something permanent instead of something precious. There's a difference. Now, I live alone. I read more, sleep less, watch the seasons change through the same window every morning. Sometimes I smile when I think of Helen. Sometimes I cry. Often both happen together. And when I remember our life, I don't think about the biggest moments. Not the wedding, not the births, not the vacations. I think about Tuesday evenings, coffee cups, thunderstorms, books, her hand reaching for mine during movies, all those ordinary things, the things I thought would always be there. If this story means something to you, sit with it for a moment. Nothing dramatic, no grand gestures. Just notice the people who still sit beside you. Notice who still reaches for your hand. Notice who still waits for you to look up from your thoughts. Because one day, without warning, ordinary life becomes memory. And memory, I've discovered, is both beautiful and terribly lonely. As for me, I carry gratitude and sorrow together now. I think that's what old age really is. Not wisdom, not peace, just learning how to hold both without dropping either. And some nights, when the house is quiet and rain taps softly against the windows, I still hear Helen's voice. Not angry, not disappointed, just gentle, reminding me of something I learned far too late, that love does not die all at once. It simply grows hungry, and if you stop feeding it, eventually, even the most beautiful things become tired.